the moderator for this evening's webinar. As your moderator, I'm excited to introduce to you the agenda for this evening, review some quick housekeeping details, and introduce our presenter, Siah. Tonight's agenda will cover what is mindfulness, what are some benefits of mindfulness, how do we go about teaching mindfulness, mindful parenting, some resources related to mindfulness, as well as a Q&A and some meditation tips and exercises. Morneau Shepell helps 500,000 people each year through therapy, education, and coaching. Children's Support Solutions helps children reach their potential through an interdisciplinary and family-centered approach. We offer assessments and treatment in a variety of areas, including psychology, speech-language pathology, behavior therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and special education. We have locations in Ontario, Quebec, as well as online. Some general housekeeping tips. Just note that your microphone will be muted throughout the presentation. You can choose to join through two different methods. One is through the mic and speakers. That means you hear us through the speakers on your computer. The other option is the telephone, and you can dial in using the information provided. Any questions you may have can be submitted through the questions panel by typing them in. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be provided online within 48 hours. Just a reminder again, if you have a question and we don't get to it, you can either submit it through the questions panel. We'll see if we can get to it at the end. If you need more information, you can email Sarah Bingham at sbingham@morneaushepell.com. And a special offer from Morneau Shepell Children's Support Solutions. If you mention you participated in our webinar this evening, when you book an appointment between now and December 31st, we'll waive the administration fee. Just a reminder, after the webinar, you can visit our website at www.childrensupportsolutions.com or call 1-866-653-2397. About our presenter this evening, Dr. Siah. He is a clinical child psychologist. He is fully licensed. He specializes in several services for a wide variety of mental health concerns. He can assess. He can do psychoeducational assessments, psychological assessments, developmental assessments. He offers therapy in a variety of techniques, including CBT as well as mindfulness and video therapy. He does consulting on a multidisciplinary team and can also work with schools. And he regularly commits to outreach in the community by doing educational workshops and webinars. Welcome, Dr. Siah.
Hi, everybody. I just want to start off by saying that I'm really excited to talk about this topic. Mindfulness in particular is something that I've had a passion for quite a long time. In fact, I did my doctoral dissertation on trying to teach mindfulness to children, so this is right up my alley. So when we start to talk about mindfulness, we try to describe what it is, and that's often a more difficult question than you might think, because mindfulness is meant to be experienced rather than explained. So to do so, I thought we'd do a quick little exercise to try and get us to kind of understand mindfulness from a more experiential perspective. So close your eyes and let your mind settle on a situation where you completely lost track of time. Maybe it was something that was so amazing, so awe-inspiring, engaging, entertaining, something that completely focused and absorbed you. Perhaps it was a sporting event that you're participating in, a piece of music you were playing, a conversation with someone that drew you in completely. A moment in nature or with an animal. Whatever it was, let yourself dive into the memory of it, using all of your senses to dip yourself back into it as if it were happening all over again. Okay, so that little exercise describes what's called flow state. And flow state is when we are completely absorbed in a situation or an activity such that we lose all track of time. It's a very enriching and pleasant experience. Mindfulness is similar to that in that our goals are fourfold. Mindfulness, the formal definition, is paying attention, kind of using all of our five senses, and paying attention to what's happening outside of our bodies and also what's happening internally. This attention is purposeful. That is, we're choosing to pay attention to our everyday experiences rather than being on autopilot or mindless. And it's in the present moment. If you think about it, our lives are always happening in a series of present moments. The past has already happened, the future is yet to come. So if we bring our awareness to the present moment, that helps to ensure that we're not missing anything that's happening. You think about your day, there's so many moments, I'm sure, where you're mindless, like brushing your teeth, driving to work, all sorts of the mundane tasks of our lives. But if you add all those moments up during our day, we find that we're often missing a large chunk of our lives, thinking about the past or the future and not really focusing on what's happening right now. And the last point is it's non-judgmental. That is, we accept whatever is happening in the moment with kindness and curiosity, not needing to push anything away. So what's the point of mindfulness? It sounds like a nice thing to do. Research has shown that mindfulness is helpful for a wide variety of mental and physical health disorders. For example, one form of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy has been shown to reduce depressive symptoms and risk of relapse. It's been shown to reduce anxiety symptomology in a variety of anxiety disorders, and also help with personality disorders and more severe psychopathology. It's also been known to kind of ameliorate or help physical health symptoms as well, such as chronic pain, psoriasis, improve sleep, helps with epileptic seizures, and emotional consequences associated with cancer and heart disease. Mindfulness is not just for adults with disorders, though. It's also helpful for the general population. And psychology in general, the branch of psychology that deals with well-being, positive emotions and behaviors is known as positive psychology. It kind of studies the areas of self-fulfillment. So some of these everyday benefits of mindfulness include, increase in just global well-being, empathy, vitality, pleasant affect, life satisfaction, our relationships with others, personal growth, attention, and also decreases in unpleasant affects like negative emotions, mood disturbance, and stress. And the research in terms of children and youth is a little bit less clear, less well established. Many of the studies that have been conducted have methodological flaws, not having a control group or low sample size. But we're beginning to see some trends emerge. As a backdrop, kids are already predisposed to have a mindful view on life. Like if I think of my 1-year-old daughter, when she goes to the park, oftentimes she'll pick one blade of grass out of the 1,000 blades of grass that are there, one that I wouldn't even notice, and focus all of her attention in the present moment on that blade of grass. This kind of mind frame is often referred to as beginner's mind, that is really being open and receptive and willing to learn about whatever is right in front of us. And as adults, we begin to lose that as we get older. I know I'm not so fascinated by grass myself. So for children and youth, some of the research that's being carried out shows that, first of all, it does no harm, right? It's enjoyable to practice by teachers and students. There's been shown to be improvements in terms of stress, anxiety, reactivity, behavioral concerns, and improving sleep, relaxation, self-awareness, all these positive effects. And the same with youth or adolescents in terms of reducing negative emotion, anxiety, and improving well-being and popularity. And the interesting thing about all these results is that nothing about mindfulness strives or tries to attain any of these results. Mindfulness is only being aware in the present moment and accepting what's happening. And everything else that I've described thus far is just a side effect of that kind of viewpoint. So that's something to keep in mind, that when we practice mindfulness, we're not striving to achieve anything. We're just trying to be open and accepting to the present moment. So teaching mindfulness can be a difficult thing. It's not something that we can just kind of read a book about. It has to be kind of lived and experienced on our own. And that's been consistent across anybody who teaches mindfulness. The importance of having your own mindfulness practice or cultivating your own mindfulness before you can teach other people. And there's certain prescribed steps that a lot of different research programs have developed. And we'll talk about each of these in turn. Oftentimes, when we're starting to cultivate our mindfulness practice, we focus on the body, because that's something that we can more easily pay attention to than perhaps our thoughts or feelings. So one thing we can, so one thing we can focus is the breath and who we are, and who we are, because the breath is often an anchor that's with us every day in every moment of our lives. We can observe through our 5 senses, and often, as I said, removing the judgment on things, separating what's actually happening from our judgment of what's happening. And we can pay attention to the details of our everyday lives, and also understand that when we're learning to cultivate mindfulness, it's a patient and kind of incremental thing. It's not something we can learn overnight. In fact, Buddhist monks spend their lifetime trying to cultivating this awareness. So we need to keep that in mind and have realistic expectations. So like I said, the beginning to teach mindfulness often happens with working and focusing on the body. One practice that people often do is eating mindfully. And eating mindfully means really focusing on what we're eating to the exclusion of all else, using our 5 senses. So being aware of what we're eating with touch, taste, smell, sound. It's often weird to hold food to your ear, but that happens. And really focusing on what we're doing. And the benefits of doing that are multiple. One is that when we focus on what we're eating, we also focus on our body sensations associated with it. So we tend to not overeat because we pay attention to our body's feelings of satiation. Also, when we're paying attention to what we eat, we tend to make better choices about what we eat, right? So if we're really focusing in on that, like, chocolate bar, and thinking about all the things that chocolate bar implies, we might not choose to eat that chocolate bar. Whereas a lot of people, when they're snacking, they'll eat mindlessly, right? They'll just scarf something down while they're watching television or doing work. And those situations promote less healthy eating habits. We can also do what's called walking mindfully, where we really pay attention to our bodies as we walk outdoors, often barefoot. In terms of movement, we often do yoga. And that's traditionally used to both recognize the different sensations in our bodies and how they change depending on different poses, and also to prepare our body for sitting in a more formal, lengthy practice. The last part is the classic mindfulness exercise, is the body scan. You can look these up on YouTube, but basically it's bringing our awareness to every part of our body and noticing what's happening in our bodies in the moment. And by cultivating that awareness, we can become aware of when our bodies are signaling to us that we're under stress or we're experiencing different emotions. Part of mindfulness, too, is, again, accepting the present moment for whatever arises. And some of those experiences can be positive, right? I don't know about you, but sometimes when I have a negative experience, I allow that to color my entire day, right? So let's say I get a speeding ticket in the morning. There can be a lot of thoughts related to that speeding ticket, and they can last way longer than the actual situation, right? So I could think of like how unfair the situation was, like how much I had to pay, or the effect of insurance, and that can carry with me throughout the rest of my day. If I were to be more mindful of present experiences, I might be able to notice more positive things that are happening to me after that speeding ticket. Like, I don't know, it's like a beautiful day outside, someone's smiling at me. But if I choose to instead focus in on the past and not be aware of the present, I can become kind of overwhelmed with those negative feelings. Another positive kind of experience is called loving kindness. And that's allowing us to focus on compassion towards ourselves and others. Self-kindness just means, bringing compassion to ourselves and knowing that, everybody in some way is suffering. Everyone is under stress. And just taking some time to really care and nourish ourselves. And similar to that, it's just awareness that everybody else in the world, everyone that you're interacting with also has stress in their lives, also has difficulties that they're trying to approach. Of course, many of our experiences in life are also negative, and it's something that's part of the human condition, having negative or unpleasant experiences. Again, by accepting that these happen, we can change our relationship with unpleasant experiences through mindfulness. One study that really shows this is by Grant and Rainville in 2009, which compares meditators, which is the light gray bar, and also the squares, to control subjects, which are just typical adults, which is the darker bar or the dark circles. So they expose these two groups to an unpleasant experience. In this case, a hot temperature, like a hot stimulus. And the stimulus, they could increase or decrease the temperature. So if it got hotter, then it got more and more unpleasant. So the first thing we can look at is in graph A, we notice that meditators are just more tolerant of more unpleasant experiences. They can tolerate higher temperatures and more painful stimuli than typically functioning adults. If we look to the right, then under intensity and unpleasantness ratings, we notice that meditators, so in the baseline condition, we notice that when they are told to just concentrate on an experience, there is very little change in terms of both intensity, how intense it is, and how unpleasant the experience was. But when they're told to focus on the experience mindfully, that's the mindfulness condition, there is a significant decrease in both how intense the meditators experienced it and how unpleasant they rated it as well. So what's the takeaway message here? If we're able to observe our unpleasant experiences without needing to change them, that is, be non-judgmental towards them, we begin to experience them as being less unpleasant and more tolerable over time. However, we just told to concentrate on the experience without bringing that non-judgmental aspect to it, then it doesn't change our relationships with unpleasant events. And by allowing ourselves to focus on the negative, we begin to understand what it's actually like and not turn away or avoid it or fall into sometimes our negative thinking patterns. And as an aside, this effect held for how much someone meditated. So the most experienced meditators, the meditators who were like a Zen monk who had over 45,000 hours of experience, had the biggest effect. So the more you practice mindfulness, the more you change your relationship with unpleasant experiences. Mindfulness can also be applied to decision making and how we kind of approach major and minor decisions in our lives. The way this works is that mindfulness helps us to cultivate what's called our metacognitive abilities. And that's just a fancy label for thinking about one's own thoughts, right? Examining our own thought processes, kind of distancing ourselves from our thoughts to view them impartially. And you know, research shows that mindfulness is associated with greater awareness of one's environment. It allows us to kind of hold in our mind ideas or emotions or sensations that are uncomfortable or potentially threatening. And by allowing us to be aware of ideas that are threatening and to not push them away, it helps us to make better decisions or consider more options. More specifically, mindfulness can help with framing a decision, such as clarifying objectives, avoiding perhaps holding on to decisions you made before and acting in the same ways you did before if it was ineffective. It can help with gathering information, both in terms of breadth and in terms of depth of information collected, just being aware of what's really out there. It helps with coming to a conclusion in that mindfulness can help us to examine the trade-offs of different decisions we make. It can help us to learn from feedback. An important part about decision making is improving our decision making progress in the long run. And that's kind of accepting feedback, both positive and negative. Oftentimes people feel very uncomfortable by negative feedback, though, and push it away. Whereas if we're mindful and more accepting of it, we can learn more from experience and make perhaps different decisions next time. Mindfulness can help us proceed with caution. So if we're always kind of aware of the different variables involved, we tend to not just jump in and make and choose a course of action right away, but rather weigh information carefully and make a considered decision. And lastly, and this is kind of interesting, it's kind of savoring the decision-making process. As we remember back to the first thing I was talking about, mindfulness is similar to being in that flow state, being really engaged in what we're doing. So if we're really engaged in a decision-making experience, that can help to make it a more positive and more pleasant experience, and can help us to inform our decision-making. So practically, one acronym we can use to help us with mindful decision-making is STOP. So the S stands for stop. So when you notice that you're stressed or you notice some imbalance in your body, you can just simply take a moment and pause. You can take a deep breath at that point. As I said before, the breath is often an anchor into our bodies. So noticing how the sensations of our breath is at the moment can help us really to take stock of our bodies. Like what is something happening in our body that's affecting our stress level? Is something tight? Is there an indication of anxiety, of sadness? Where is that felt in the body? The O stands for observe. Again, this is noticing, again, this is the body, but also noticing what's around us and also what's in our heads. So what are some thoughts we're thinking? Accepting those, and also noticing what's happening around us with other people who are involved in the moment. And P stands for proceed. So having taken in what's happening around us, accepting it, making a mindful decision, taking action that is skillful and appropriate to the situation. So mindful parenting. So we can bring mindfulness into our parenting. And it can help us with our relationship with our children and how we interact with them. So the first part about that is just making space for being mindful every day. As I said before, the more we practice mindfulness, the more we cultivate it, the more it begins to affect us, both in terms of positive and negative experiences, and also in terms of our ability to make decisions. I once had a coworker who used to be a monk, and she used to tell me 5 good minutes are what you need. Just 5 minutes every day where one can really focus and pay attention to what they're experiencing is enough to kind of really get started. Obviously, the more you practice, the greater the reward. Mindful parenting can help us to manage our stress. Like, as parents, we're often living lives in an overscheduled, kind of constant low-grade stress environment. As a result, we rarely bring our best selves into our interactions with our children. So as we begin to really kind of identify our minds and what's happening in our bodies through mindfulness practice, it becomes possible to kind of track and notice stress or imbalance in the body or the mind as we're going through our day. So we can shift from being mindlessly reactive, just reacting to whatever your child throws at us in stress, to, again, pause, using the STOP acronym, and make better decisions. Mindfulness can also help us to embrace what's called a good enough parent. So nowadays, there's so much information out there about what's the best way to parent our child, right? We have like information overload through the internet, through TV, social media, and it's a lot to digest. And we feel like we really need to have this really high standard of ourselves as parents, often striving even for perfection. And when I say good enough parents, people, that strikes people as weird. Like, it's not every day that someone says it's okay to be adequate as a parent, right? But it's really important to recognize and to bring some self-compassion to ourselves, in that everybody fails. As a parent, you're going to fail. As a parent, you're going to make mistakes. And that's just part of the human condition. For children, they need to understand that this failure happens. Shielding them from failure gives them an inaccurate model of what it is to be human, right? So when these inevitable moments of imperfection and failure occur, they can become opportunities for modeling how we deal with these failures. If we can model it using maybe humor, honesty, kindness, compassion as a way of learning, it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate that not everyone is perfect and no one can be perfect. Mindfulness can help us to honor our children's sovereignty or separateness from us. It's pretty important that we establish some healthy boundaries between ourselves and our children, allowing us to kind of really observe what's going on both in ourselves and in our children. A lot of times when we parent, we can bring into when we parent a lot of biases, a lot of maybe unmet needs, a lot of stresses that aren't the result of your child, right? And we can project them onto our child. So, for example, I know in my own life, I have a 1-year-old, and when I come home sometimes, it's almost like a bit of a competition between me and my wife for like my child's affection, right? Like, who's the better parent? Who will she go to first? Who will she hug more? All these kinds of, subtly competitive framework we have. And I need to recognize that mindfully, that's just coming from me. Those are my thoughts, right, about how much my child loves me or does not love me, or how I measure up as a parent. And being careful not to project that onto my child. That's kind of my stuff, not my child's stuff. So mindfulness helps us to kind of make that separation and to be aware when how we're parenting is based on our own stuff rather than our children's stuff. And finally, cultivating kindness and compassion. We already talked about this, but mindfulness really shines a light on how parenting is, a really challenging and really difficult thing. There's no finish line to parenting. There's no hiding. So we need to bring that kind of compassion and kindness to ourselves. That parenting can be hard, but we also must recognize again that we're not going to be perfect. And we don't need to constantly strive for that kind of ideal. And so kids can kind of pick that up as well. So what are some mindfulness resources? Here's a kind of a brief list for different resources you can look up in terms of books. I really like the stress reduction workbook for teens, for example, if we're working with a teen population, especially they're really stressed out, and a lot of teens are nowadays. And so we can also, we're going to do a QA right now, but at the end of the presentation, I'm not really going to go through it, but there's some tips about how to meditate. There's some guided practice options for both preschoolers and children and preteens. If you have questions about that, I can go about them. I can discuss it a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sam. That was awesome. And so now we're going to turn it over to you as the audience. If you have any questions, just a reminder to submit them under that question box through the software. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen. In the meantime, we'll take some questions that were sent a little bit earlier into Dr. Sam. Dr. Sam, take it away. Sure.
Some people ask me, what's the best age for really beginning to cultivate mindfulness? And I think, there's not really there's no too early stage for mindfulness, other than being able to kind of just basically understand language and what you're talking about. Mindfulness can be cultivated in preschoolers. There's some practices which, involve like putting a toy on a child's belly and having them pay attention to that. And we can bring kind of everyday mindfulness into many different tasks that we have, like paying attention to what we eat, for example, as a family. Is something that you can practice with everybody. Or when we're walking in nature, really being aware of what's happening in the environment.
We have a question from the audience about getting a list of the resources, and I think Sarah Bingham, who is our wonderful tech guru, can arrange to have it put up on our website, so thank you for that. I think a question that some members of our audience may have is, well, what if you have more than one child in your household? Can you practice mindfulness as a group?
Yeah, for sure. Most of the time when people are learning to cultivate their practice, it's done in a group format. And that's because when we really start to pay attention to what's happening in ourselves, it's really interesting to compare that to other people's journeys and how they themselves are experiencing kind of this compassion and this self-awareness. So with kids, that's also an option. And most of the practices that I've talked about are really easily adapted to groups, like eating mindfully. For example, if everybody had a family meal and there are multiple siblings there, everyone can kind of compare and contrast. What are they noticing when they're eating? Or when everyone's taking a walk, similar things. So what are they noticing during that walk? It's always great to have a discussion to recognize that our experiences, although unique, are often shared and similar to other people.
That was a great one, thank you. So we just got a question. Sorry, they're a bit hard to read on here, so we're going to do that. So as a teacher, I would like to start mindfulness with my students. How do I inform the parents? Are there any recommended resources? I'm afraid they may see it as a religion.
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, mindfulness traditionally was based on Buddhist practices, but there's been a big transition in Western practices to kind of separate the skill of mindfulness from the religion of Buddhism. In terms of resources, parents, there's a lot of websites out there. Mindful Schools, if you look that up online, has a lot of good resources and tips. There's a lot of mindfulness in schools if you Google that in general. There's even a conference that happens where educators come together and discuss how to implement mindfulness in general. Goldie Hawn has a foundation as well that kind of promotes mindfulness in schools. It's a growing kind of sphere. So if we emphasize mindfulness more as a skill, as an attention-based skill, I think that can overcome some of the religious connotations, perhaps.
That was a really good question. Thank you for sending that in. And so I think another question some people may have is, we at Children's Support Solutions work sometimes with children with a variety of developmental disabilities. So I think a question that's pretty good is, how would you potentially look to introduce mindfulness with some of the children who may have fewer verbal skills, so they may not have as much language as some of the children that potentially we would typically use mindfulness with? What might that look like?
That's also a great question. And as I said right at the beginning, mindfulness is meant to be experienced experientially, even rather more than verbally. So a lot of our practices that we're talking about, like for example yoga, can just be modeled for a student, for a child, and they can practice it themselves however their bodies can allow it or can manage it. Perhaps there'll be less discussion per se, but if they're just more aware of their bodies, that is already cultivating a mindful practice. So language isn't completely necessary, I think, for learning mindfulness.
That was a good one.
Thanks.
So I think at this point, another question just came in. My 9-year-old daughter seems to have a fixation on negativity and focuses on all the bad parts of her day. It's very challenging to inspire her to be positive. If I suggest mindfulness, I expect it will get a judgmental reaction of, why are we doing this? This is stupid. Why can't I just, etc. How can I initiate mindfulness with her?
That's a really great question as well. I would say in this situation, we don't really need to use the term mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is just attempting to verbally describe something, again, that's experiential. So if you were to instead say to your child, listen, I really want to spend some quality time with you. And what I mean by quality time is just choosing to really pay attention to what's going on. And really, leaving everything else at the door. I'm going to put my phone away. You can put your video games down. We're just going to spend some time, you and I, just really focusing on one activity. And it could be even a mutually enjoyable activity that you guys want to do. And bring your full awareness and attention to it. And if you're still having trouble, there's lots of there are teachers and groups that can teach mindfulness on more of an objective level, so it isn't just coming from you as a parent. Yeah, so those are some resources, I think.
I think another question to ask that we may have gotten before is when we're starting out, it might be really difficult to start out. So it would be nice probably to set up a scenario for you where you can kind of tell us where the starting point would be. So let's say I'm a parent at home and I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I find I'm often stressed with them. I have a really difficult time coming in the door after work. I find I get really angry really quickly. I yell a lot at my kids. This is something we hear quite frequently. How do you start kind of in that scenario if you were to meet that family? What would you kind of advise as first steps?
So I think the first step is to carve out some protected time, if you can manage. I know it's really hard to find it, but like I said, 5 good minutes is even enough sometimes. Protected time for you to check in with your body, even before you walk in the door. Let's say you're on the commute home, you're on the subway or driving. That's a good time for you to bring kind of your awareness and your attention to what's going on in your body and your mind, and to recognize if there's something that you're carrying with you from the day, perhaps, that might impact your ability to interact effectively with your children. So again, carving out a bit of time for you to kind of focus in on your breathing, maybe do a bit of a body scan, or eat mindfully, or walk, or whatever activity you choose. And also at the same time, carving out some protected time to be with your children, just like as I mentioned before. Really showing that this particular time is free from distractions, and we're doing an activity that we can all bring our attention and awareness to. Sometimes it might help to start with separating your children, if at all possible, too, so you can spend individual time with them. Really just paying attention to a particular activity with your full awareness. As a parent, too, there are lots of mindfulness resources in terms of teaching mindfulness to parents in a more structured way. For example, I've done Mindfulness-Based stress reduction, which is an 8-week program designed to cultivate mindfulness. It's a well-researched program. And as I said before, the first step is cultivating mindfulness within yourself. It's cultivating your own practice before you can pass it along to others.
That was great. Thank you so much, Dr. Sam. So I think we'll be wrapping it up for this evening. If you have any questions, feel free to email them to sbingham@morneau.com. And just a reminder that between now and December 31st, if you mentioned that you attended this webinar with us, we will waive the administration fee for your first appointment. We encourage you to visit our website at www.childrensupportsolutions.com or call 1-866-653-2397. We thank you so much for joining us and hope you have a mindful week.